Mhm.
You live?
Live.
Awesome. Welcome to the K&T podcast. Where, let's be honest, we all think about sex. Here we have a free space to talk about it. The purpose of our conversation is to explore everything about sex. And don't worry, I'll ask all your questions and thank you for submitting them. So, we're here with the one and only Dr. Jenny, founder of Kiss and Tell magazine, as
Hi.
well as Sameera Qureshi. I'm so excited. And she's the founder of Sexual Health for Muslims. So, thank you guys all for your questions. Keep them coming. As you know, I have no shame in asking them. So, let's go ahead and get started. So, where I'm kind of stumbling here because I'm wondering how you got into this specific niche of like Muslim sexuality.
Yeah, that's a good place to start because I
Yeah.
didn't grow up. I don't think any of us grew up wanting to be a sexuality educator unless we did. But myself as like a Muslim immigrant to Canada, that wasn't on my radar. And it was through my work actually within the Muslim religious community in Canada that I was working there and addressing mental health in kids and youth and realized that, oh, kids are getting into puberty, they're growing and they're developing, and sexual health isn't being talked about because in a lot of religious spaces it's taboo. There's a lot of shame and stigma, not only with Muslims, but with like Christians and Jewish communities. A lot of minority communities have a lot of shame around sex and sexuality. So I'm like, oh, these schools aren't teaching these kids and they're really struggling with puberty and they're online. And there's, as you both know, and the viewers know, there's a lot of issues. So I worked to develop a curriculum that was Islamic, which means it was religious. And I taught that curriculum and I'm like, wow, working with the kids and parents, I really enjoyed it. And
Aw.
saw the receptivity. People were not like shunning this. They were actually like, oh, we just don't know how to talk about it. So that was in 2010. And I think, it's been 12 years since then. I continued that work and through schools and communities, and it's become my focus right now for work. So kind of started accidentally, but I'm always like, I think I was meant to get into this field. So
Yeah, you fell into something that you love and that is desperately needed. I think
yeah,
sometimes people look for that beacon, especially religiously. Um,
yeah,
so I think that's super helpful. And, you know, I'm happy you fell into that because it looks like the Sexual Health for Muslim website, and again, sexualhealthformuslims.com or at Sexual Health
yeah,
for Muslims on all social. You really cover everything.
yeah.
And it's very supportive, and you're not being, well, nobody should do this or nobody should do that. You're being like, this is how we
Hmm.
can do this together. So that really touched me.
Yeah.
Um, so, Dr. Jenny, do you have any questions? I have a couple viewer questions to cover
Yeah,
later.
I'm curious, Sameera, have you had any interesting stories as far as people giving you a hard time about what you do for a living?
I have no shortage.
Great question.
Um, I have no shortage. I feel like we all do, right? Like you said, we think about sex and, kiss and tell is having these conversations. Not everybody is. And I think what happened is I started this work in Islamic schools and mosques, which just like churches and other places of worship, they can be the most conservative and challenging to break through. And I did receive some, individual pushback, but the one thing that was beneficial was relationship building. So I lived in that community. People saw me worship there. They knew my family, so there was trust building. Over the last 10, 11 years, I've definitely gotten pushback. Some of it has been kind of personally directed, questioning my faith and my motive. I would say over the last 3 years since I started my own business with sexual health for Muslims, that hasn't been there as much. And part of it's my own boundary setting. When people do come to me and, give me a hard time, I see that as their discomfort being projected onto me. So I think I'm able to have a bit more compassion with any messages I get or comments that I think, how can people say this to someone they don't know online? Like, I just can't imagine people like saying this.
Yeah.
Call me old fashioned,
Hurt people
um,
hurt
but
people.
I'm able to like be empathetic and say, I get you're uncomfortable, and I'm also not responsible for that discomfort. So now I just ignore. I'm able to emotionally separate myself, and I know that people are on their own journey. So before I would take it very personally, it would cause me a lot of emotional stress. I think the last few years, I'm not so much like that anymore. And that's just been my own journey, I think, with being a bit more separated from my work emotionally.
Great. Good for you. Because I know there are people that do what you do and what I do for a living that have that constant battle. I mean, because people don't accept the
Yep.
profession, you know,
Yep.
they don't give it legitimacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though it's real. It's not, neither one of us got a degree from the back of a Cracker Jack box. You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, so
I
yeah,
had to
so
work a little harder than eating an entire box of Cracker Jacks
Yeah.
to really,
No
to really do
kidding.
it. I mean, just to extend that though, I really like the way you worded that, because you're not responsible for other people's feelings. But
Mhm.
empathy is one in one, and I feel like sometimes people think like they have to be separated. So
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I can take that to every aspect of my life without it having to be very pointed in one direction or another. So I think that's really, I mean, for me at least, a little profound, and kind of helped me, after a bad day at work or after like a relationship issue, or I'm not
Yeah.
responsible for your, discomfort or your, hate even, or your feelings that are derogatory in any way, whether it's because I get cream in my coffee or because of my religion, or
Yeah.
anything along those lines. I think that's a really great message just to
Yeah.
spread in general.
Yeah. And I think too, though, maybe that's one thing that shifted about my work is, like you said, like Steph, I'm not telling people what to do. And for me, sexual health is not only what we think about with pleasure and relationships and sex, it's also about this inner journey of getting to know yourself.
mhm.
Because a lot of times in our relationships and in our, partnerships and in our exploration, we tend to focus on like the outward stuff, but we all know like the outward is sometimes and oftentimes a reflection of the inside. So I'm really hoping that, my work is really about sexual health from the inside out, not the outside in. And so I'm
Yeah.
hoping people can get more aware of themselves, including discomfort. And I'm like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to not be able to talk about this because you don't have the words. Like, we're all okay. We're all learning and struggling. And I think normalizing that for
Right.
sex and sexuality is so important.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I definitely agree with that. I mean, it helps people talk about it. When you're at ease with it, it helps them be at ease with it.
Yeah.
When you're comfortable with the topic, they can be too. So
Hmm.
that helps.
yes. And I
Yeah.
will take a quick moment to plug your questions. We've gotten so many questions, and I've asked maybe 2 or 3 of them, but but as you know, I have no shame. So always go on the website, go to the About Us, and put your questions in there. And I will, Ask Kiss and Tell. I will always, always, always ask, despite, the things that people maybe don't want to talk about.
So, what are you working on now? I mean, do you have something that's going on now that you're looking forward to in your profession?
Yeah, so a colleague and I are actually running like a marriage prep webinar in a few weeks because for a lot of Muslims, that step is huge, and a lot of us haven't gotten sexuality education from, a holistic perspective. A lot of Muslims wait until they're married to be intimate. So we're actually running like a bridal prep course that's
Aw.
focused on marriage though. Yeah, we're really focused on, so much energy goes to the wedding, but what about the marriage?
Mhm.
We want to think, and this is actually would be beneficial for anyone. I mean, it's Muslim specific, but like communication skills, how to set boundaries, how to understand sexual response and pleasure, problem solving, like all the stuff that, we don't often learn before we're in a relationship is what we're aiming for. And I'm currently running a healing group for women in trauma. So that's a 5-week program that I'm running. And I'll probably be releasing more toolkits and courses the next few months. So I'm kind of going for like the hot topic. So I have like a sexual intimacy and marriage toolkit. There's other ones coming out to do with parenting and talking to kids about sex, which is huge.
Yes.
So I'm kind of taking the topics that I do put on social media and then deepening them, because you can't learn everything on social media. We have to go a little bit deeper and kind of go inward.
We need
People
to
think they
like
can't, but
Dr.
they
Jenny
can.
to do that, because if we're only learning on social media, that's kind of the whole point, right, Dr. Jenny, of why you started Kiss and Tell?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, for the inner journey, like
Right.
for
Yeah,
you to
those
like,
conversations, yeah.
exactly, like let's raise awareness and give you language, and then you're going to need time to like heal and relearn and like implement them in your relationship. So that's kind of the nitty-gritty stuff that is harder to teach online.
Yeah. You have to unlearn some of the poor messages that you received.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell the audience about how similar Muslim females are with other cultures, because I think there's an assumption that they're their own thing, but they're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think there's some confusion about the word Muslim and Islam. So the word Islam is like Christianity and Judaism, it's a religion.
Mm-hmm.
So a Muslim is somebody who practices Islam, so it's a religion, it's not a culture. So a culture would be, for me, like my parents are from Iran and Pakistan, so that's my cultural background. So I'm like an Iranian, Pakistani, Canadian, American Muslim, if I were to put everything together. So the faith traditions, like, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, all the religions are quite similar. I think what's happened with Islam especially is the political scene of what has happened to the religion and how it's been unfortunately talked about and focused on and kind of made to be. And that's obviously a whole nother podcast, episode or 10 to talk about that.
Right.
But there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding. But generally speaking, we are very similar to other Abrahamic religions like Christianity and Judaism. There's a God, there's messengers, we have certain beliefs, and it's an inward journey. It's not just about ritualistic practice. So a lot of what people know about Islam, if you learn about it online, it's probably not accurate. That, like that's why I can't say that. Like, news and other outlets. So that's what I'm also trying to do with this work, is trying to educate about Islam without saying that I am, even though I'm saying it now. I want people to like learn about it secondhand through my work. So a lot of non-Muslim professionals I work with, and even non-Muslims in general, to kind of educate them, because it's no different than many other religions. It's like belief in a higher power and God. The logistics may look different, but the belief system is very similar.
Yeah. So I have a quick question about that, and this is a personal question, but just to circle back to what you were saying earlier about speaking to people before they get married, or when they're like, thinking about it or getting ready to. So I'm Catholic. We have pre-Cana. All the Catholics out there, if I mispronounced it, I repent. But it sounds like it might be similar. Now, it's not sexually based, but my priest sent my husband and I home with like a book of questions to ask one another before we would go back and say, yep, we still want to get married. That sounds like something that could be really helpful in that area, and looks like, based on, the sexualhealthformuslim.com website, that's something you're really kind of striving to work on, because it doesn't have to be all this or all that. And it needs to be as human beings, especially as a couple, you need to understand that about each other. So, you were doing the intimacy and pleasure, and the relationships and marriage are really big. And you said you were doing something about with, expecting couples. So I'd love to hear a little more about that, because I think too, it's just generally important. But I think specifically in certain communities, it is.
Yeah.
Like, who talks to us girls?
Yeah.
Who comes out and says, listen, sit down.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up what you find within the Catholic tradition, because also within the Islamic religion, there is a value of abstinence for spiritual reasons. A lot of people learn about it from a fear-based, like hellfire perspective. I'm trying to, bring back the kind of spiritual decision making that people can think about, so you're fully informed with decision making, based on your values. So because there's that value, and that's why I'm focusing on like the marriage prep, because you're right. So, within Islam, it's not like religious leaders give couples these questions to ask one another and these conversations to have. There's no formal system of religious leadership in Islam like there is within the Catholic tradition. So, which means there's a lot of gaps. Some religious leaders are trained, most are not. So that's where the gap comes. So that's what we're trying to fill. And not only obviously with women, we also know where a lot of men are getting their information from. And it's not completely accurate or holistic. There's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. So it's all about kind of intervening and saying, like, let's think about what we know and don't know. And especially for marriage and preparing for that, it's getting them to have the skills that they need that they may not have had. Otherwise, it's a void. I mean, we see everyone struggles with relationships. When you are of a faith tradition, though, you have been often left out of sex ed in a way that speaks to you, right? So I never got sex education growing up from an Islamic perspective. Most of us haven't. Same with other minority communities, religious or not. So that's the gap that I think myself and others are trying to fill in our communities.
That's invaluable. Because you speak to the people, like I said, who are like, well, how do I know? Or I feel like I'm marrying this person because I love them. But sometimes people get into marriages or even relationships or even having, bearing children where it's like, doesn't look like we were really ever aligned on these issues. And it's something maybe we should have confronted earlier, which actually it's funny, kind of circling back, is our priest, who we were new to their church. And, I'm not super religious or practicing or anything along those lines. He handed us a handwritten note and was like, have this conversation with each other, which some of it was like, all right.
Yeah.
This from a priest. But I guess kind of going back to what you're saying, having those conversations and people seeing the value in initiating those conversations, like yourself and like Dr. Jenny, is really a service to the community as a whole, but also to women and sexual health. Yeah.
I don't know if you both think this, but I joke and I sometimes say, we think that we just download information about healthy sexuality and sex, but we don't. It has to be like actively learned. Otherwise, I don't know if you both find we're just sponges with what we consume, but then it's not really like accurate, intentional learning. So it becomes really complicated. I don't know if you both find that too.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I find the biggest, in my opinion, is the issue is people get the information, wherever it may be, and they apply it immediately to themselves, even though they have no idea whether it's something important to them or not. They just know other people are doing whatever it may be. So they're like, oh, I must do that as well.
Yeah.
Instead of learning what what they like and don't like. So to me, one of the biggest issues most people have, male or female, is not knowing themselves that well and just going along with popularity, whatever that may be. So,
Yeah, I think it's a weird thing between mission-based and experience-based. Is if someone says, this is you, this is what you do, this is how you act, this is how you believe, and it's kind of reinforced throughout your life, is okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, and this is what whereas if you're more experience-based and taught to be that way, which we all, depending on upbringing, some people have whatever, having people like you, Sameera, and Dr. Jenny, who are there to be like, hey, so let's discuss, like, let's broaden that, mission-based, and you can still believe, you can still, that might still be your opinion, but let's just explore, and kind of just go out and spin these spider webs into like, oh, well, why? A very specific example of that for me, and a little personal. So I see a psychiatrist. If you don't, maybe check it out. And she was a friend of someone I worked for in the past. And the woman I worked for, Dr. Kim, I told you about, she's fantastic. She referred me to one of her coworkers or, colleagues, and said, hey, if you have a history of heart disease in your family, are you going to monitor, your blood pressure and your heart health? Are you going to take those steps? So if you have a history of mental health in your family, which, again, I do, why wouldn't you do the same thing? And I think that kind of lends itself to, if you were to be interested in a topic, you would learn as much as you can about it and question it. So why is that different from what you're taught about sex or religion or about your own body even? So I found that kind of impact, even just reviewing your website and looking at the new programs you have coming up, was really impactful to me. Was just kind of being like, but can we look at it? Can we talk about it? I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
But let's just unpack things a little bit.
Yeah. And I think there's fear of that, right? There's always, and we see this, when we're writing articles, like we're trying to keep the conversation of sexual health and wellness going, because it's sometimes hard to keep it going.
right.
There's fear of expanding the topic because there's fear of the unknown. There's fear of, am I allowed to do this? Like, what's going to happen? There's fear of being able to handle what that means. So a lot of it comes from like not being exposed to it or not feeling like you have permission. So there's, multitude of reasons. And I always say none of it is actually religious. It's always some sort of like misconstrued, from an Islamic perspective anyway. It's not ever religious. It's been misunderstood to be religious because of various factors. So it's almost like giving themselves permission to explore, and learning is actually empowerment, and it's self-journey, and it doesn't mean anything because you can learn and then you have control over what you do with that. It's not like we're just going to learn and start running around. Like we can have, control and reflection and, act in a way that's in line with our values.
Yeah. And you bring that up. It's on your website too, I believe, that you're taught. And I think this is with many of the traditional religions, is like, you're imprinted with this is sex, this is marriage, you wait for this. But we're not actually taught to question any of it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I got that from your website. We're not taught to be like, hey, so why?
Yeah.
And then have it explained. And even if it validates what that person or, figure was trying to say, there's this weird, I shouldn't say weird, but there's this feeling of I can't question. And do you find that to be relative to what you do? Because just reading your website, sexualhealthformuslims.com,
Yeah.
it really spoke to me again. As I was raised Roman Catholic, so
Yeah.
there's no, there's no religion that maybe had a bad experience with Islamic culture and even Muslim, culture to begin with. But everything you said really related. Like, I really related to that. I felt that. I agree with that. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, well, you're not the way I was raised. You're different. It doesn't matter who you are. If you changed 2 words in that sentence to whatever, plug and play to whatever person's experience is, the message would be the same and it would be just as profound.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you saying that. And I've done, interfaith work with different religions, and it's the same. Also, I've done work with non-religious minority communities. It's the same. And I think for Muslims to hear that, it can be reassuring because I often get the question like, is this normal? Like, am I the only one struggling with this? Are we the only ones? And I'm like, no, like, I'm not just saying this to comfort you. I've been in, Muslim, my feet are kind of in Muslim and non-Muslim worlds. They always have been for work. So I'm seeing the bigger picture. I'm like, no, we're struggling with the exact same things. We're going to need different understandings because we have like spirituality as our framework. And we're going to need somebody to actually talk in a way that resonates with people. So, and then sometimes for me, I'm referring to non-Muslim professionals and I give Muslims the language to talk to a non-Muslim to advocate. So it works both ways. So my goal is not to make Muslims like insular. I want them to be able to navigate this world outside of the East, because a lot of us are in the West now, right? Like we're living in non-Muslim countries. How do we learn about our values and then connect with people who are from different backgrounds but are struggling with the same thing? Because we're all human at the end. Like we're all human. We're all navigating this kind of messy sexual health kind of scene that we have. So that's something that bonds us together, I think.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of something else that I have written down on a sheet of paper, which was actually a question that I'm kind of spinning into my own question. Sorry, guys. We're covering all the all the bases here. So specifically sex during marriage. So even if you're not religious at all, your ideal or your sex education or whatever it was, whether it was your parents, whether it was in school, whether you're watching the dirty moves, how, your explanation of, okay, it's great, whatever, wait until you're married, but how do you explore sexuality with your spouse or with whomever you're with? Because if you're not taught in any way and you're not like me and ask 100 million questions, how do you become physically comfortable?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something I work with Muslims a lot on. And so a lot of times in a lot of people's head, they think sex is something that is 0 to 100. 0 means no sex, and then 100 being like, let's just say intercourse, or whatever sexual intimacy looks like. For me, I'm all about like, what's this middle ground that we don't learn, that we just, either see, like you said, in movies or unfortunately pornography, where it just seems automatic and spontaneous. So a lot of times I talk about foundations for sexual intimacy are emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, right? Like, do we have the same values? Are we connecting? Non-sexual physical intimacy, because not all forms of physical intimacy are sexual, right? We're physically affectionate for multiple reasons. So I work with couples on kind of exploring physical intimacy, communicating with each other about comfort, boundaries, how fast, how slow, and then moving towards what sexual intimacy could look like. Obviously, talking about sexual response, so desire and arousal and pleasure. So all of this middle ground, and then also being present in the body, because sometimes we're up here and then pleasure shuts down. So this is all the like stuff that like people don't realize we need to now be like, oh, okay, so when I'm with my spouse and we're married now, we're going to try like these ideas for physical intimacy. We're going to go with the flow, we're going to communicate, we're going to try this and that. That's ideally how I work with couples to progress them. And I say like sexual intimacy is the most vulnerable you will ever be with somebody, and let's get you comfortable and not see this as a 0 to 100 race. It's not. It's a slow progression. Intercourse is one menu item. Maybe it's not on the menu. So like seeing all of that as like the menu, and then having people understand like, where are you at? Can you communicate? Keep communicating, and just realize that getting to know each other's bodies is going to take a while. So
Yeah, thank you. Good response. And adding to the menu comment, sometimes I tell people, we have more of a conversation about what we're eating than we do about what we're doing in the bedroom.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but that's something that has to be learned. So,
Yes. Yeah.
It has to be learned. I mean, again, I'm just Steph. I don't have any, but in my opinion, it has to be learned by being open enough. And I think Dr. Jenny and Sameera, you both have kind of inspired me, but I think inspired and put into practice the, I guess, almost canonization of like, you need to figure out, whether it's with your partner, whether it's other, like what makes you comfortable, what you enjoy, how you interact with things, and what you want out of, interactions, whether it's, I hold the door open for someone when they walk through the door. Do I expect them to say thank you? I'd like to. I'd like them to, but, having that kind of, it's okay if you wait until you're married to have sex, if that's what makes you comfortable.
right.
But if you want to explore things, whether it's, just with yourself or with a partner, I mean, unless there's some sort of nefarious element to that, I think you both have advocated, and correct me if I'm wrong, for being able to accept and understand yourself and kind of allow yourself to explore, different things, whether it's reading an article or, going to some sort of, we'll leave that over there. I think you guys have been really like substantial beacons for understanding yourself, your sexuality, and how that interacts with, your culture, your, friends, your relationships. And that's something that I always, have taken away from Sameera, your articles on Kiss and Tell magazine, and Dr. Jenny, yours as well. And anytime I get to kind of come in and ask all the audience questions, which again, you guys, thanks for submitting. Once again, go to kisandtellmagazine.com/ask-us. So, Dr. Jenny, do you have any other questions for the lovely and inspirational Sameera?
No, but I want to say thank you for being our guest. You did a wonderful job, of course. I knew you would. And thank you for being a part of Kiss and Tell.
And again, it's sexualhealthformuslims.com or at sexualhealthformuslims. Sameera, any last moments? When's your next workshop?
Oh gosh. I think it's the marriage prep one on
Yes.
March 26th. Yeah, in a few weeks. That one's coming up. But until then, we're kind of prepping in the background for that. So I really appreciated chatting with you both. The main thing I love about Kiss and Tell is the ability for me to come and bring my work as it is unapologetically, which I really appreciate. I'm not having to like filter or change my approach, which is so valuable, because so often that's how a lot of minority folks are meant to feel, especially religiously. Like, do I fit? Will I fit? Maybe I need to change myself. And for me, I write as if I'm kind of writing for my website for Kiss and Tell. So that's really telling. So I appreciate you both and Dr. Jenny for, creating this space. And I hope people continue to subscribe and read and ask questions, right? So
everybody thinks about it. Doesn't matter culture, background, whatever it is, male, female, we all think about it. Here we're going to talk about it. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. Our next podcast is March 22nd. It's just a Q&A show. So keep those questions coming. I have no shame in asking them, and I'm more than interested to hear the answers. Again, Kiss and Tell Magazine, ask us. Anything else, Dr. Jenny, you'd like to add?
No, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sameera. I can't thank you enough. You really, again, going through all your stuff really inspired me. So I appreciate you dealing with all my questions and taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you.
It was lovely to see you both.
You too.
And for everyone to join. Thank you all.
Yes. Talk soon. And guys, again, submit your questions.